Welcome back, learner. Today, I want you to imagine a creature so entirely alien, it feels like it was pulled straight from the pages of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, like something out of a movie.
Right. A creature that tastes the physical world merely by brushing its skin against it, literally thinks with its limbs, and it pumps bright blue blood through its veins.
Which is just wild.
You'd probably assume we're talking about life discovered on some distant, ice-covered exoplanet, but...
But this intelligence is right here on Earth.
Exactly.
It's a parallel path of evolution. It really represents a completely different biological answer to the fundamental question of how to build a complex, problem-solving mind. And, for the most part, it's navigating its world completely indifferent to our existence.
Now, to get to the bottom of this, we are pulling from a rather unusual piece of source material today. The text we're taking a deep dive into is an excerpted transcript from a relaxation and sleep journey video. It's courtesy of a YouTube channel called Drift and Discover. And the whole premise of their video is to lull you to sleep with the slow, poetic rhythm of ocean currents.
Right, it's very ambient.
Very ambient. But instead of letting you drift off into unconsciousness, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to extract the incredibly dense factual biology woven into this text.
And it works, right? By stripping away the dry rigidity you might find in a normal biology textbook, that relaxation audio actually manages to highlight the sheer wonder of the animal.
It really does.
But when you isolate and examine the raw biological facts they present, the implications are staggering.
Yeah. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the profound alien intelligence of the octopus and explore what this radically different biological architecture can actually teach you about the nature of consciousness itself. Okay, let's unpack this.
To understand how an octopus thinks, we first have to understand the radically different physical vessel it occupies.
Right.
If you look at human beings, or really any vertebrate, we are built on a foundation of rigidity. We rely on levers and pulleys.
Meaning bones and joints.
Exactly, to interact with our environment. The octopus, however, is built entirely on flow.
And they are everywhere. Reading through this transcript, it's wild to realize there are over 300 known species found in literally every ocean on the planet.
Every single one.
They're surviving in warm, shallow tide pools that you could casually wade through on a beach vacation, all the way down to the crushing abyss of the midnight zone where sunlight never even reaches.
And their scale varies just as dramatically,
Yeah, you have species smaller than an inch living out their entire adult lives in spaces the size of a walnut.
Right. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the giant Pacific octopus, which is an absolute titan.
Just massive.
We're talking about a creature stretching 6 meters from arm-tip to arm-tip, weighing over 50 kilograms.
Wow.
It's the kind of massive scale that undoubtedly inspired ancient seafaring myths, about the Kraken.
Oh, for sure.
But regardless of whether they're the size of a thumbnail or larger than a human, they all share the exact same fundamental boneless architecture.
Zero bones. Zero cartilage. I kept waiting for a catch when I was reading this, but the only hard structure in their entire body is their beak.
Yeah.
Which is hidden right in the center where all their arms meet. And I was reading the breakdown of this, and it says the beak is made of chitin.
Yeah, that is the exact same complex carbohydrate material that makes up an insect's exoskeleton.
Or like a crab's shell.
Exactly. It's incredibly tough.
It sounds like a terrifying little parrot beak that they use to crack open shells. But because that beak is the only rigid point in their anatomy, it dictates their physical limits in this really mind-bending way.
Right, because if that solid beak can fit through a gap,
the entire rest of the body can follow. Human bodies are what, about 60% water? But we're permanently locked inside a bony cage. The octopus is basically intelligent water. They just pour themselves through spaces. But how do they actually exert force? If you have no bones to pull against, how do you move?
Well, they utilize something called hydrostat mechanics. Because they don't have a skeleton to provide leverage, their muscles work directly against other muscles.
Huh.
Yeah, it relies on the fact that the tissue itself, being mostly water, is incompressible.
Like a human tongue.
Or an elephant's trunk.
Mm-hmm.
When muscles running lengthwise contract, the arm shortens and thickens. When muscles running circumferentially contract, the arm lengthens and thins out.
Wow.
So by constantly coordinating these contractions, they can bend their arms in literally any direction at any point. There are no elbows, no wrists, no fixed joints, limiting their range of motion. It is just continuous, infinite flexibility.
Okay, I was reading the breakdown of their internal organs, and I got completely tripped up. It says here they have 3 hearts.
3 hearts, yeah.
How does a single organism even coordinate 3 hearts. And why would it even need to? I mean, 2 of them are called branchial hearts, which pump blood specifically to the gills, and one is a systemic heart that pumps oxygenated blood to the rest of the body.
Right.
If you have 3 hearts, I would assume you are the ultimate marathon swimmer. But swimming actually exhausts them incredibly quickly. Why is that?
What's fascinating here is the evolutionary trade-off they've made regarding energy. When an octopus swims using jet propulsion, meaning it rapidly blasts water out of a muscular tube called a siphon to shoot backward through the water,
Great.
that systemic heart, the main one pumping blood to the brain and body, actually slows down. Sometimes it even stops entirely during the contraction.
Wait. So the moment they need to move fastest, their main heart shuts off?
Yeah, that is the paradox of their design. The internal pressure required to forcefully expel that water literally squeezes the systemic heart, hindering its ability to pump.
Oh.
So moving fast through the water is incredibly energetically expensive and deprives their tissues of oxygen. Their cardiovascular system just isn't optimized for sustained, rapid swimming.
Makes sense.
That is why they vastly prefer to crawl or use their arms to pull themselves along the seafloor. They save jet propulsion for sudden, desperate bursts, mostly for escaping a predator.
And the blood those 3 hearts are struggling to pump is literally blue. The relaxation audio brings this up as a very poetic image, but it's not a metaphor.
No, it's real.
When exposed to oxygen, it is bright, vibrant blue.
Yeah, and the chemistry behind that blue blood explains a great deal about how they conquer the oceans. Human blood is red because we use an iron-based protein called hemoglobin to bind and carry oxygen.
Yeah.
It's essentially a very controlled form of rust pumping through our veins. Octopuses utilize a copper-based protein called hemocyanin.
And unlike our hemoglobin, which is neatly packaged inside red blood cells, this transcript notes their hemocyanin just floats freely in the blood plasma.
Exactly. That structural difference is key. When that free-floating copper binds with oxygen, it oxidizes and turns blue. Now, if we look at pure efficiency in warm, highly oxygenated water, iron-based hemoglobin is generally superior.
Okay.
But down in the freezing high-pressure environments of the deep ocean, where oxygen is incredibly scarce, the rules of chemistry change.
Because the cold affects how the molecules bind.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Under extreme cold and immense hydrostatic pressure, hemocyanin actually outperforms hemoglobin in its ability to grab onto whatever scarce oxygen is available and release it into the tissues.
Wow.
They traded metabolic efficiency in warm surface waters for absolute dominance in the extreme freezing depths.
So we have a creature with blue blood that is incredibly inefficient of fast movement. It can't simply outrun predators, and it has no bony armor to protect itself.
Right, it's very vulnerable.
Yeah, if you are basically a slow-moving, protein-rich water balloon, what is your only other option for survival? Pure calculating intelligence.
The raw processing power they've developed to compensate for their vulnerability is remarkable. They possess roughly 500 million neurons.
That's huge.
To put that into perspective, that is more neurons than you would find in most dogs. They are, without question, the smartest invertebrates on Earth.
The examples of their intelligence are staggering. It's absolutely wild to read about how they use social learning. Like, one octopus can watch another octopus in an adjacent tank solve a puzzle and then immediately replicate the solution without any language or direct instruction.
They are entirely capable of observational learning, which requires a highly sophisticated level of cognitive processing.
I think I was most shocked by the facial recognition.
Oh, yeah.
They can remember specific human faces. They know the difference between a researcher who feeds them and a researcher who gently pokes them with a stick.
And they remember it.
Yeah, and they will hold a grudge, squirting water only at the annoying researcher weeks later. They can solve multi-step puzzles, like unscrewing the lid off a jar from the inside to get out.
Or from the outside to get a crab inside.
Yes, but the physical architecture of that intelligence is what broke my brain. Only about a third of those 500 million neurons are located in their central brain. The other 2/3 are distributed entirely throughout their 8 arms.
Yeah, the central brain acts more like a high-level executive director rather than a micromanager. Think about the bandwidth required to consciously control 8 infinitely flexible arms, each with hundreds of independent suckers.
It would be impossible.
Right. If a central processor tried to calculate the angles, the pressure, and the movement of every single muscle fiber, it would completely overload. So the central brain sets a broad objective, like explore that crevice for food.
And then the arm just takes over.
Exactly. The arm executes the goal, utilizing its own local processing power. It figures out the specific mechanics of the grip and the search entirely on its own.
That's unbelievable.
It is so highly autonomous that if an octopus's arm is tragically severed by a predator, that detached arm will still reach out, explore its surroundings, and react to painful stimuli for a significant period of time, completely independent of the main animal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Not only do those arms think for themselves, but they possess an unbelievable sensory fusion. The source transcript details that their suckers contain both mechanoreceptors, which detect physical touch and texture, and chemoreceptors, which detect specific molecules in the water,
Yeah.
meaning they literally taste what they touch simultaneously. I want you to just imagine holding your morning coffee cup right now and your fingertips instantly tasting the chemical makeup of the ceramic.
It's hard to even picture. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces us to reconsider how we view our own bodies. Human beings actually possess distributed intelligence too.
We do.
Yeah, we have millions of neurons in our gut forming the enteric nervous system, which manages our digestion without our conscious input. Our heart has its own localized nervous system to keep it beating. Our immune system fights microscopic wars completely in the background.
That's true, but we don't feel like a collection of systems. We feel like one person sitting behind our eyes.
Exactly. We operate through semi-autonomous systems every second of the day. But our central ego, that unified I residing in our skull, arrogantly claims credit for all of it.
Right.
We maintain this stubborn illusion of absolute top-down control. The octopus, by contrast, lives in a constant, transparent state of conscious delegation. It is functioning as a networked community rather than a single, isolated processor.
With a distributed mind that constantly tastes and feels every microscopic inch of its environment, the octopus is uniquely equipped to perfectly mimic that environment. Their intelligence isn't just used to open jars in laboratories. It's directly applied to a relentless, high-stakes game of hide-and-seek. They are absolute masters of illusion.
Oh, absolutely. Their camouflage capabilities are functionally unparalleled in the animal kingdom. They can change their color and their physical texture in fractions of a second to match coral, rocks, or kelp.
But how does a creature pull that off so instantly?
Well, it is achieved through an incredibly complex biological display system. The first layer consists of chromatophores. These are essentially tiny, pigment-filled sacs that are tethered to radial muscles.
Okay.
When the brain sends a signal, the muscle contracts, stretching the sac wide open to display a burst of color, red, brown, yellow, or black. When the muscle relaxes, the elastic sac shrinks back down to an invisible microscopic dot.
So it's literally like individual pixels turning on and off on a living television screen.
That is the perfect analogy.
Mm.
But the display technology goes even deeper. Beneath those pigment sacs, they have a layer of iridophores.
What are those?
These are reflective cells that manipulate light to create iridescent shimmers of blues and greens.
Yeah.
And beneath those, they have leucophores, which act as a pristine white background to reflect ambient light and enhance the contrast of the colors above them.
Wow. And they don't just become the same color as a rock either. They raise papillae on their skin to physically mimic the bumpy texture of the coral or the sand.
Exactly. The texture change is key.
Now, I need to push back a little on the tone of our source material here. The relaxation tape paints this whole camouflage routine as part of a very peaceful, meditative ocean journey. But let's be real, if you are a crab minding your own business, an octopus is a terrifying, invisible ninja that suddenly materializes out of a rock and eats you.
Very true.
They aren't just hiding from sharks, they are highly offensive ambush predators.
The reality of their daily survival is exceptionally brutal, which, strips away that meditative framing. Because they lack bones or armor, their soft bodies are incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Essentially, everything in the ocean wants to eat a giant, unprotected source of high-quality protein. That intense, constant predation pressure is what drove this extreme evolutionary arms race. Their survival relies entirely on stealth, deception, and completely outsmarting their environment rather than relying on brute force.
And their arsenal extends far beyond just an invisibility cloak. They're practical engineers. I was reading how they actively use tools.
Oh, the coconut shells.
Yeah. They will collect discarded coconut halves or large clam shells, carry them across the ocean floor, and arrange them as blast doors to fortify their dens.
Which is incredibly smart.
And when a predator does spot them, they squirt a cloud of ink that doesn't just create a smoke screen, but actually forms a thick, dark decoy called a pseudomorph that hangs in the water, mimicking their shape while they jet away.
It's brilliant. We also have to look at how they process the heavily armored prey they catch. They possess a structure called a radula.
A radula.
It is essentially a muscular tongue covered in a conveyor belt of microscopic teeth. They use this rasping tool, combined with highly acidic chemical secretions, to literally drill a tiny burr through the impenetrable armor of a crab or a clam, allowing them to extract the meat from the inside.
Ugh, it's like something out of a horror movie for crustaceans.
Mhm.
And some species, like the famously tiny blue-ringed octopus, back up this physical arsenal with lethal neurotoxins capable of paralyzing and killing a human in minutes.
Yeah, it demonstrates a mastery of their environment that really rivals our own, just in a completely aquatic context.
Which brings us to a massive contradiction. We have established that this is an astonishingly advanced creature boasting 500 million neurons, facial recognition, and the ability to literally vanish in plain sight.
Right.
But nature enforces a brutal, almost unfair constraint on all this brilliance. A heartbreakingly short lifespan. Most octopuses only live for 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, it is a profound biological tragedy. Even the massive giant Pacific octopus might only reach 5 or 6 years under the absolute best conditions.
That's nothing.
Their entire existence is hyper-compressed. And the reality of their death isn't usually dictated by old age, disease, or even getting caught by a shark. Their death is strictly dictated by reproduction.
The transcript describes this horrific process of reproductive senescence. It's basically programmed, accelerated aging. Once they mate, a biological clock just runs out. I know males usually die shortly after passing on their genetic material, but the females undergo something agonizing. Why does the female completely waste away?
It is a total, terminal biological commitment. Once a female finds a safe, hidden den, she lays thousands upon thousands of eggs, weaving them into long strings that hang from the ceiling.
Okay.
From that moment on, she dedicates her remaining existence entirely to guarding them. She gently blows water over them to keep them oxygenated. She aggressively fends off scavengers. And crucially, she stops eating entirely.
Wait, she just starves.
Her body literally begins to dismantle itself.
Right.
Her cellular machinery shuts down all standard maintenance, redirecting every last biological resource she has toward protecting those eggs.
That's heartbreaking.
By the time the tiny offspring finally hatch, the mother is completely spent and dies. She never gets to actually see or interact with the children she sacrificed everything for.
And even after all that sacrifice, it's still what biologists refer to as lottery biology. These newly hatched babies, called paralarvae, are practically microscopic. They drift upward into the ocean currents like tiny specks of plankton.
Yeah, they're on their own.
Because they're minuscule, protein-rich, and totally defenseless, almost everything in the ocean filter feeds on them. The vast, vast majority of them will not survive the week.
No.
The mother undergoes a gruesome starvation process, just so a microscopic fraction of a percent of her thousands of babies might beat the odds.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? As a listener, it's incredibly hard not to feel the emotional weight of that design. Why on earth does nature invest 500 million neurons, complex puzzle-solving skills, facial recognition, and the ability to taste the world through touch into an animal that only gets to use those miraculous gifts for 18 months? It feels like a colossal waste of a brilliant mind.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally view evolutionary purpose. Humans are what biologists call a K-selected species. We have very few offspring, we invest massive amounts of time and resources into keeping them alive, and we rely on a very long lifespan to accumulate knowledge and pass on culture.
Right, that's what we consider normal.
Because of our own bias, we assume high intelligence is a strategy strictly reserved for long-lived animals. We assume a big brain needs decades of use to be worth the biological cost.
But the octopus breaks that rule completely. They are an R-selected species producing thousands of offspring with no parental care after hatching.
Exactly. The octopus proves that profound, high-level intelligence is also a perfectly valid evolutionary tool for burning bright and incredibly fast. For them, being exceptionally smart isn't about building a civilization or passing down wisdom. It is simply an immediate, high-powered survival mechanism. They use their immense intellect to solve the daily puzzles of outwitting predators and securing food for just long enough to reach reproductive age, pass the genetic torch, and exit the stage.
Yeah.
It is a completely different temporal reality.
It really shifts your entire perspective on life on this planet. You know, you're sitting there listening to this, living your life on dry land, experiencing the world through a bony skeleton and a centralized brain, probably thinking humans are the absolute pinnacle and center of the universe.
Yeah.
But the ocean covers 70% of Earth. We are the ones living on the dry, extreme margins. Meanwhile, deep in the blue, The vast majority of our planet's habitable space is filled with alien minds, pumping copper blood through 8 limbs, experiencing a tactile chemical reality. We lack the physical hardware to even conceptualize.
Yeah.
And they are completely indifferent to our existence. They don't care about our civilization. They are just surviving brilliantly in the dark.
I think the most profound philosophical takeaway builds directly on that realization. Consider the heavily distributed mind we discussed earlier. If an octopus's arm possesses enough local independent intelligence to solve physical puzzles, to react to pain, to taste the chemical makeup of its environment completely on its own without the central brain's input,
Right.
where exactly does the self of an octopus reside?
Yeah.
When you look at an octopus, are you looking at one singular, unified creature? Or are you actually looking at a cooperative community of 9 separate minds, one central executive and 8 highly intelligent limbs, all sharing a single liquid body?
That is deeply unsettling in the best possible way. It makes you wonder about the myriad of voices and systems operating inside your own body, or the intelligence living silently in your own gut. As you go about the rest of your day, take a moment to mull over how fragmented your own sense of self might truly be. Are you a single pilot consciously driving a machine? Or are you actually a committee taking a vote on every action? Think about that the next time you brush your hand against a wall, and be glad you don't instantly taste the paint.